Hey guys, tonight we're standing barefoot on a sun-bleached hillside in the eastern Mediterranean, squinting through a haze of wood smoke and animal fat, watching a man in a wool tunic argue passionately about the nature of justice while his neighbor urinates against a temple wall. This is ancient Greece, the civilization that gave the world democracy, philosophy, theater, the Olympics, and a truly staggering number of ways to cook a goat. They invented rational thought and also believed that a well-timed sneeze from the right direction meant the gods approved of your battle plan. So tonight, we're going to live inside this world from the ground up: the dirt, the oil, the wine, the arguments, the glory, and the absolutely magnificent smell of a city that has never once heard the word sewage system. But before we step into sandals that have seen better centuries, let's take care of a few things first. Before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me what ancient Greek job you'd end up with: philosopher, olive farmer, professional funeral mourner, or the guy whose entire career is scraping oil off athletes with a curved stick. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that gentle white noise, and get comfortable. Tonight your bed is already better than anything a Greek king ever slept on. And that includes Agamemnon, who conquered Troy and still didn't have a fitted sheet. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered what an ancient Greek city actually smelled like on a hot afternoon in July? Have you ever thought about what would happen to you, specifically you, lying in bed right now, if you accidentally sat in the wrong seat at the theater? Have you ever considered that the world's first democracy didn't let women vote, didn't let immigrants vote, and technically counted about 15% of the population as eligible participants? Have you wondered what they actually put in the wine, and why drinking it undiluted was considered a sign of dangerous insanity? Have you thought about what a Greek bathroom looked like, or more accurately, what it didn't look like, because they didn't really have one? Have you ever wondered what happens when an entire civilization decides that olive oil is the answer to literally every problem: cooking, bathing, lighting, medicine, athletics, and possibly romance? And have you ever stopped to wonder how a collection of tiny, constantly bickering city-states that could barely agree on a calendar managed to produce the philosophical foundations of the entire Western world, and then immediately went back to fighting each other over a stolen pig? Good. You're going to find out. Congratulations. You've just woken up in roughly 440 BCE in a narrow alley somewhere in the city of Athens. The first thing you notice is the smell, a dense, layered perfume of roasting barley. Donkey, wood smoke, urine, crushed thyme, and something that might be fish sauce, or might be a tannery. And honestly, you're not sure you want to know. The second thing you notice is the noise: roosters, hammering, someone singing badly, and a goat that sounds personally offended by the morning. Your bed is a wooden frame strung with rope. Your pillow is a block of wood with a cloth over it, and there is a cockroach the size of a date sitting on your chest, like it pays rent. Welcome to the Golden Age. Try not to step in anything. Let's set the scene. You're standing at the edge of the Agora, the central marketplace of Athens, and the first thing you need to understand is that this is not a market in the way you're picturing it. Forget the neat rows, the price tags, the air conditioning. The Agora is a wide, dusty, sun-hammered open space surrounded by low colonnaded buildings called stoas, and it is, without exaggeration, the living room of the entire city. Everybody is here. The fishmonger is here, shouting about the freshness of his mackerel with the conviction of a man who knows perfectly well that fish has been sitting in the sun since dawn. The barber is here, and his stall is less a place for haircuts and more a place for gossip so potent it could topple a government. The banker is here. Yes, they had bankers, and yes, they were already unpopular. There are philosophers wandering around in bare feet, asking strangers uncomfortable questions about virtue. There are slaves carrying amphoras of wine on their shoulders. There are old men sitting on stone benches arguing about politics with the energy of people who have nothing else to do and nowhere else to be, which, to be fair, is exactly their situation. The ground is packed earth, stained with oil and wine and the occasional dark smear you learn not to investigate. Flies are everywhere. Dogs wander freely, and they are not the Instagram-ready golden retrievers of your imagination. They are lean, suspicious, deeply opportunistic animals who treat every dropped olive as a personal victory. You spot one particular dog, a rangy brown mutt with a torn ear and an expression of absolute moral superiority, sitting in the shade of a marble column like he owns the place. You will see this dog again. He is a permanent fixture. The Athenians call him Argos, because they name every dog Argos. And honestly, it saves time. The stoas, those long covered walkways, are where the real business happens. Under the shade of their roofs, men lean against columns and talk. They talk about war, about money, about the latest play, about whether Socrates is a genius or a menace. A question that, spoiler, the city will eventually answer with hemlock. The air under the stoas is cooler, slightly, and smells of dust and old stone, and the faint residue of whatever oil the columns were treated with. You press your back against one and watch. A man in a clean white himation, the draped garment that serves as the formal wear of Athenian gentlemen, walks past with the careful, measured stride of someone who is very aware that his outfit has no buttons, no zippers, and no backup plan. One wrong arm movement and the whole thing unravels, which is both a fashion challenge and an accurate metaphor for Athenian politics. His name, you learn later, is Demetrios, and he is a mid-tier citizen, not wealthy enough to own a horse, not poor enough to row a warship, but prosperous enough to have opinions about both. He has 3 slaves, a modest house near the city walls, a wife he rarely mentions, and a deep, abiding conviction that Athens is the greatest city in the world, and also that everyone running it is an idiot. You will hear a lot from Demetrios. He is, in many ways, the most Athenian man in Athens. And yet, underneath the noise and the dust and the smell of fish that has definitely seen better days, there is something here that you can feel, an energy, a hum, a sense that the people in this square are doing something that no one else on earth is doing in quite the same way. They are governing themselves, badly sometimes, corruptly, often. But the very idea that a fishmonger and a philosopher and a retired soldier can stand in the same open space and vote on the same law, that idea, right here in this loud, smelly, fly-ridden square, is brand new. And in a world where every other civilization on the planet is run by a king, a pharaoh, or a warlord who answers to nobody, this messy, chaotic, frequently disastrous experiment is possibly the bravest thing anyone has ever tried. Welcome to Athens. Mind the dog. Let's talk about the man in charge. Except there isn't one, and that's sort of the whole point, and also sort of the whole problem. Athens doesn't have a king. Athens doesn't have a president. Athens has the assembly, the ecclesia, which is, in theory, every adult male citizen of Athens gathering on a hillside called the Pinax, roughly 40 times a year to shout at each other until a decision gets made. This is direct democracy. No representatives, no parliament. No intermediaries. Just you, 6,000 of your closest friends, and a stone platform where anyone can stand up and propose a law, argue a policy, or accuse a fellow citizen of being a traitor. It is exhilarating, terrifying, and if you've ever attended a homeowners association meeting, deeply familiar. The man who currently holds the most influence, not the most power, because technically no one holds power, which is a legal fiction so transparent you could read a scroll through it, is Pericles. Pericles is tall, eloquent, politically brilliant, and so self-conscious about the unusual elongated shape of his head that he is almost never depicted without a helmet. The Athenians called him Squillhead, squill being a type of sea onion with a bulbous top, and he apparently took it about as well as you'd expect, which is to say, not great. But Pericles is brilliant. He speaks with a precision and emotional control that makes other politicians sound like they're reading a shopping list in a windstorm. He has guided Athens through its transformation from a scrappy city-state into the dominant power of the Aegean, funded the construction of the Parthenon, which is, by any measure, one of the most beautiful buildings ever constructed by a species that also invented the strip mall. And he has done it all while technically holding no more official authority than the guy selling figs by the gate. Spoiler, the guy selling figs also gets a vote. The system works like this. A citizen, any citizen, can propose a law. It gets debated. People shout. People gesture. Occasionally, someone gets pelted with olive pits, which is the Athenian equivalent of being ratioed on social media. Then they vote, usually by show of hands, and the majority wins. Simple, clean, absolutely terrifying if you think about it for more than 30 seconds. Because this means that the same crowd that just voted to fund a temple can, next week, vote to execute a general who lost a battle. And they do, regularly. There is also a mechanism called ostracism, which is, without question, the most Athenian invention ever devised. Once a year, the assembly can vote to exile any citizen for 10 years. You don't even need a reason. They hand out broken pieces of pottery, ostraka, and you scratch the name of the person you want gone. If enough people write the same name, that person has 10 days to pack their things and leave. No trial, no appeal. Just the collective judgment of 6,000 men who may or may not have a personal grudge. It is democracy at its most beautiful and its most ruthless. And honestly, most workplaces would benefit from it. And yet, for all its chaos, the system produces something remarkable. It produces debate, real debate, not the rehearsed, sound-bitten, pre-approved debate of modern politics, but raw, public, occasionally profane argument about what is right, what is just, what Athens owes its citizens, and what its citizens owe Athens. Men stand on that stone platform and speak about duty, about honor, about the cost of war, and the crowd listens, and sometimes they are persuaded, and sometimes they are not, and the whole messy, imperfect process lurches forward another day. In a world of absolute rulers, that counts as a miracle. Let's talk about the rules, not the laws. The laws are written down, sort of, in a way that mostly benefits the people who wrote them, which is a tradition that has aged remarkably well. No, the rules. The unwritten code that governs every interaction, every relationship, every meal, every conversation in Athens. The stuff nobody teaches you because everybody already knows it. Except you, because you just woke up here with no context and a wooden pillow dent on the side of your face. Rule 1. Honor is everything. Your reputation, your time in Greek, is the single most valuable thing you own. More valuable than your house, your slaves, your olive grove. More valuable than your life. A man without honor is a man without a city, without friends, without a future. Every public action you take is being watched, evaluated, compared. Did you fight bravely? Did you speak well in the assembly? Did you fund a chorus for the festival? Did you cheat at dice? Every answer matters, because in a city of perhaps 30,000 adult male citizens, everybody knows everybody, and gossip travels faster than a chariot on a downhill road. Rule 2, hospitality is sacred. If a stranger arrives at your door, any stranger, even an enemy, you are obligated by the gods themselves to take them in, feed them, give them a bed, and ask no questions until they've eaten. This is Xenia, and violating it is not merely rude. It is an offense against Zeus himself, who is specifically the god of hospitality, which is ironic for a deity whose own personal conduct would get him permanently banned from every hotel chain on Earth. Spoiler, the entire Trojan War, in the Greek telling, started because someone violated Xenia. Paris showed up as a guest in Menelaus's house, ate his food, drank his wine, and then left with his wife. Everything that followed, the ships, the siege, the wooden horse, the burning city, all of it, according to the Greeks, traces back to a house guest with catastrophically bad manners. Rule 3, moderation in all things. The Greeks have a word for it, sophrosyne, and it means something close to self-control, temperance, the ability to know your limits and stay within them. Drink wine, but not too much. Exercise, but not to the point of vanity. Speak in the assembly, but not for too long. Pursue wealth, but not at the expense of your reputation. The man who lacks sophrosyne is dangerous, ridiculous, or both. He is the man who drinks his wine undiluted, straight, no water, which the Greeks genuinely consider a sign of barbarism on par with eating with your hands, or, worse, not speaking Greek. Rule 4, know your place. This sounds simple. It is not. Your place depends on whether you are a citizen, a medic, a woman, or a slave. And within each of those categories there are gradations so fine and so fiercely defended that the entire social structure of Athens operates like a seating chart at a wedding, where everyone has a grudge. A citizen who was born to citizen parents has more standing than a citizen whose mother was foreign. A wealthy medic, a resident foreigner who pays taxes, serves in the military, and contributes to the economy, has fewer rights than the poorest citizen, including the absolute inability to own land or vote. A woman, regardless of wealth or intelligence or family status, exists in legal terms as a permanent dependent, first of her father, then of her husband, then of her son. And a slave, well, a slave is property. Valuable property, sometimes cherished property, but property all the same, in a city that talks about freedom more than any city on earth. The truth is, the rules of Athens are the rules of every human community dressed up in wool and olive oil. Be useful, be respected, don't embarrass yourself, and never ever forget who's watching. And someone is always watching. In a city without walls between neighbors, without glass in the windows, without curtains or locks, or any meaningful concept of personal privacy, someone is always watching. Welcome to democracy. It comes with a side of surveillance. Let's talk about the people. Not the famous ones, not yet. The ordinary ones, the ones who make the city run while the philosophers are busy wondering whether the chair they're sitting on is truly real. You've already met Demetrios, the mid-tier citizen with opinions. Now let's meet the others. There's Phila. You won't meet her in the Agora. Because women don't go to the Agora. Or, rather, respectable women don't go to the Agora. And Phila is, above all things, respectable. She is Demetrios's wife, and she runs the household with the quiet, relentless efficiency of a woman who knows that the entire domestic economy of a Greek family depends on her competence and that she will receive absolutely no credit for it. She manages the slaves, oversees the food stores, spins wool, weaves cloth, raises children, and handles the household budget, all from inside the house, because the gynaikion, the women's quarters, is her domain, and it is, for all practical purposes, her world. She is smart. She is funny, in a way that only surfaces when she's talking to the other women at the fountain house, which is the closest thing Athenian women have to a social club. She has opinions about Pericles that would make the assembly blush, and she will outlive Demetrios by a decade, manage his estate better than he ever did, and never once be allowed to vote on any of it. There's Cosmas, who is a medic, a resident foreigner from Corinth, who moved to Athens 15 years ago and now runs a pottery workshop near the Keramiakos, the potter's quarter. Cosmas makes some of the finest red figure vases in Athens. His work is bought by aristocrats, exported across the Mediterranean, and displayed in wealthy homes from Syracuse to Sardis. He pays a special tax, the metoikin, for the privilege of living in a city that will not let him own the building he works in. He serves in the military when called, pays his taxes without complaint, and cannot vote, cannot hold office, and cannot marry a citizen woman. He is in every functional sense Athenian, and in every legal sense, he is not. He takes this about as well as you'd expect, which is to say, with the quiet, simmering resentment of a man who makes beautiful things for people who consider him a permanent guest. And then there's Xanthias. Xanthias is a slave. He belongs to Demetrios, and his job is everything. He cooks, cleans, runs errands, carries water, attends Demetrios at the baths, stands behind him at dinner parties, and on one memorable occasion, carried him home after a symposium that got out of hand. Xanthias was born free, somewhere in Thrace, and was captured in a raid as a child. He does not talk about this. He speaks fluent Greek, understands Athenian politics better than half the citizens who vote, and has a dry, deflective wit that Demetrios finds charming in exactly the way that a man finds his dog's personality charming. With affection, but without any intention of changing the fundamental power dynamic. Xanthias sleeps on a mat near the kitchen. He owns nothing, and he is, by any objective measure, one of the most competent people in this story. You also notice Argos, the dog, who has apparently followed you from the Agora and is now sitting in a doorway across the alley, watching you with the expression of an animal who has seen civilizations rise and fall, and is primarily interested in whether you have any bread. You do not. He remains unimpressed. And yet, despite the staggering inequities, there is something here that looks, from the right angle, almost like community. Phila and the women at the fountain house have built a network of mutual support, so intricate and so resilient that it functions as a parallel government. Cosmas and the other medics have formed associations, pooled resources, and created a social world that mirrors citizen life without any of its privileges. Even Xanthias has relationships with other slaves, with the household, with the neighborhood, that give his days structure and, occasionally, something that resembles dignity. The system is unjust. The people inside it are doing their best. And in ancient Athens, doing your best is sort of the only option anyone has ever had. Let's talk about the daily grind. You wake up, and by wake up, I mean, you are woken up because the rooster in the courtyard has a personal vendetta against sleep and will not rest until every living thing within a 2-block radius shares its misery. It is dawn. The sky through the open window, and it is open because there is no glass, just a wooden shutter that lets in light, air, flies, and the full acoustic experience of the neighborhood. Is the pale gold of an Aegean morning, and the air is already warm. You roll off your Klein, a low wooden couch that doubles as a bed, strung with rope or leather strips and covered with a wool blanket that itches in a way that suggests the sheep it came from had unresolved issues. The pillow, as established, is a wooden headrest with a cloth draped over it, which is roughly as comfortable as it sounds, which is to say, not at all. You put your feet on a stone floor that is cold in a way that bypasses your feet and goes directly to your soul. You are wearing a short chiton, a rectangle of wool pinned at the shoulders, which you slept in because pajamas are not a thing and the concept of changing for bed is about 2,000 years away. Breakfast is fast and unremarkable. A handful of barley bread dipped in wine. Not good wine, rough wine. The kind of wine that exists to make barley bread less boring. A few olives, maybe a chunk of cheese if the household is doing well. Demetrios eats standing up near the courtyard, while Xanthias fills a jug of water from the household cistern. Phila eats separately, in the women's quarters, with the children. There is no table. There is no ceremony. Breakfast in Athens is the nutritional equivalent of checking your phone. You do it because you have to, not because you enjoy it. Then you're out, into the street, which is narrow, unpaved, and serves as a shared space for pedestrians, donkeys, dogs, wastewater, and the occasional runaway pig. There is no sidewalk. There is no curb. There is a central channel in the road that carries runoff and other things you don't want to think about, and you learn very quickly to walk on the high side. The sun is climbing. The heat is building, and the city, this brilliant, ridiculous, magnificent, filthy city, is waking up around you in a rising tide of noise and activity that will not crest until well past midday. The morning belongs to work. For Demetrios, that means the Agora, meetings, business deals, arguments that are technically about trade policy, but are really about ego. For Cosmas, it means the workshop, 12 hours of shaping, painting, firing, with a break for bread and oil at midday. For Xanthias, it means whatever needs doing, which is always something, and is never finished. For Phila, it means the loom, the endless, rhythmic, meditative work of spinning thread and weaving cloth, of spinning thread and weaving cloth, which is both the economic backbone of the household and the primary metaphor the Greeks use for female virtue, because of course it is. And yet, there is a rhythm to it all, a cadence that your body begins to settle into after a few days. The morning rush, the midday heat, the afternoon pause, the evening meal, the lamplight, the quiet. The days have a shape, the weeks have a pattern, and inside that pattern, even the most exhausting life finds pockets of rest, of humor, of small, unremarkable pleasures, an unexpectedly sweet fig, a cool breeze off the harbor, the sound of someone playing a lyre badly in the house next door. In Athens, as everywhere, the daily grind is both the prison and the comfort. And honestly, that's true, whether you're doing it in a wool tunic or in sweatpants. Let's talk about dinner, because if you understand what Athens eats, you understand Athens, its wealth, its simplicity, its contradictions, and its truly astonishing ability to make olive oil do the work of an entire pantry. Greek food in the 5th century BCE is not the Greek food you know. There are no tomatoes. Those are from the Americas, roughly 2,000 years away. No lemons. They'll arrive eventually, from India, but not yet. No sugar. No rice. No pasta. No potatoes. What there is, in abundance, in overwhelming, inescapable abundance, is olive oil, barley, wine, cheese, and the sea. The main meal is diapnon, taken in the evening, and for an ordinary household like Demetrius's, it looks something like this. A barley flatbread called maza, which is dense, slightly sour, and has the texture of something you might use to insulate a wall. A bowl of lentil stew. Fake flavored with cumin, vinegar, and olive oil which is hearty, filling, and absolutely everywhere. Some olives, cured in salt. A piece of cheese, probably feta or something very close to feta, which means that the one Greek food you're familiar with is actually ancient. And if it's a good day, a small piece of fish, anchovies, sardines, maybe mackerel, grilled over charcoal, and served with a squeeze of bitter citrus and more olive oil. Meat is rare. Meat is expensive. Meat is, for most Athenians, something you eat at religious festivals when the animal has been sacrificed to the gods and the community shares the roasted portions. The smell of roasting beef or lamb drifting through the city on a festival day is an event, and people talk about it the way modern people talk about restaurant reservations, with anticipation, jealousy, DLC, and detailed opinions about preparation. Demetrios eats meat maybe once a month. Xanthias eats it less. Phila makes sure the children get the best portions when it's available, and takes the smallest piece herself, which is a tradition so old and so universal that it probably predates language. Spoiler: at the symposium, the famous Greek dinner party, the acrobats are slaves, the flute girls are slaves, the person cleaning up afterward is a slave. The entire production runs on labor that doesn't get a seat at the table, which is a feature of Greek life so constant that most Athenians don't even notice it. In the same way that you don't think about who cleaned the restaurant before you sat down. The comparison is uncomfortable. It's meant to be. And yet, the lentil stew is good. The bread, dipped in oil and vinegar, is satisfying in a way that requires no pretension. The olives are sharp and briny and perfect. And sitting in the courtyard of Demetrios's house, in the cool of the evening with a cup of watered wine, and the sound of Xanthias humming something Thracian in the kitchen, and Argos the dog lurking, hopefully, near the threshold, the meal feels, despite everything, like enough. In a world without refrigeration, without preservatives, without any of the 1,000 conveniences you take for granted, enough is no small thing. And in Athens, as in most of history, enough is what most people are working toward. And honestly, that's good enough. Let's talk about hygiene. Or, more accurately, let's talk about what the Greeks do instead of hygiene, because the word itself implies a level of systematic cleanliness that ancient Athens achieves only by accident and only in certain neighborhoods. You are going to get dirty. You are going to stay dirty. And you are going to learn very quickly that the Greek solution to almost every problem of personal cleanliness is the same 3-word answer. More olive oil. The bath, as you understand it, does not exist in your house. There is no shower. There is no tub. There is a basin, a lutron, and a jug of water, and you pour the water over yourself while standing on a stone floor, and that is your bath. It is cold. It is fast. It is about as luxurious as washing your car with a garden hose. Except the car is you, and the garden hose is a clay pitcher that Xanthias filled at the fountain house at dawn. The cleaning process at the gymnasium, because exercise and bathing are essentially the same activity in Athens, goes like this. First, you strip naked, completely naked. The Greeks exercise nude. This is not optional. The word gymnasium literally comes from gymnos, meaning naked. And if you show up to the wrestling ground in clothes, you are either a barbarian or lost, and possibly both. Once naked, you coat your entire body in olive oil. All of it. Every surface. You are now a glistening, slippery, vaguely food-scented human being, and this is considered the baseline state for physical activity. You exercise. Wrestling, running, throwing the javelin or discus, and the oil mixes with your sweat and the fine dust of the palestra floor to create a layer of grime that covers you like a second skin. When you're done, a slave, or, if you're less wealthy, you do it yourself, scrapes the oil, sweat, and dirt off your body with a curved bronze tool called a strigil. The strigil is essentially a body squeegee, and the resulting paste, the scrapings, are collected and sold as a folk remedy for muscle pain, which means that somewhere in Athens right now, someone is rubbing athlete's sweat paste on their sore knee and calling it medicine. This is real. This happened. The ancient sources are very clear about this, and honestly, it explains a lot about Greek medical theory. Soap does not exist, not really. There are alkaline clays, herbal washes, and various plant-based preparations that do some of the work. But the bubbling, lathering, germ-destroying soap, is centuries away. Your teeth are cleaned with a rag or a frayed twig. Your hair is oiled. Your breath is managed with chewing on anise or mastic, which helps, but only in the way that lighting a candle helps when the house is on fire, and the toilet situation. Let's address it. There is no toilet. There is a chamber pot in the house, which Xanthias empties into the street. In public, there are communal latrines, stone benches with holes over a running water channel, where men sit side by side with no partitions, no doors, no concept of what you would call privacy, conducting their business while conducting actual business because the latrine is, in fact, another social space. Deals are struck at the latrine. Arguments are settled at the latrine. The latrine is, in the most literal possible sense, where things get done. The truth is, the Greeks are not dirty by indifference. They are clean by effort, enormous, daily, olive oil-intensive effort, in a world that is actively working against them. They don't have antibiotics. They don't have germ theory. They don't have running water in private homes. What they have is determination, a lot of oil, and a strigil. And in the golden age of Athens, that's enough. Barely, but enough. Let's talk about what can get you killed. Or worse, what can get you embarrassed. Because in Athens, the distinction between the two is not always as clear as you'd hope. The social dangers of ancient Greek life are a layered cake of legal threats, personal grudges, divine punishment, and the ever-present risk that someone in the assembly will decide that you, specifically, need to leave the city for a decade. The courts are where the real drama happens. Athens has a legal system that is, in many ways, breathtakingly modern and, in other ways, absolutely unhinged. There are no lawyers, not professionally, anyway. If someone accuses you of a crime, theft, impiety, corruption, cowardice in battle, or simply being annoying in a way that damages the state, you defend yourself in person. in front of a jury of your peers, which in Athens means a jury of between 201 and 2,501 citizens, depending on the seriousness of the charge. There is no judge. There is no appellate court. There is a water clock, a clepsydra, that gives each side a fixed amount of time to make their case. And when the water runs out, you stop talking, whether you've finished or not. The jury votes immediately. No deliberation. No discussion. Each juror drops a bronze token into one of two urns, one for guilty, one for acquittal, and the majority wins. If you are found guilty, the penalties range from fines to exile to death, and the method of execution, if it comes to that, is hemlock, a poison derived from a plant that causes ascending paralysis, starting at your feet and working its way up until your lungs stop. Socrates, the most famous philosopher in the history of Western civilization, was convicted by a jury of 501 Athenians on charges of impiety and corrupting the youth, and he drank the hemlock in 399 BCE. In a scene so quietly devastating that it still makes philosophers cry 2,500 years later. But the day-to-day social dangers are less dramatic and more insidious. Gossip is a weapon. Reputation is everything. If your neighbor tells the barber that you were seen leaving a known gambling house, by sunset your standing in the community has taken a hit that no amount of public generosity can repair. Demetrios knows this. He is careful about where he is seen, who he is seen with, and what he says in public, because the whisper network in Athens is faster, more accurate, and more merciless than any newspaper will ever be. There is also the danger from above, or at least from the direction the Greeks believe above to be. The gods are watching. The gods are always watching. And the gods of ancient Greece are not the serene, benevolent deities of later religious traditions. They are petty, jealous, vindictive, lustful, quick to anger, slow to forgive, and entirely capable of destroying your life because you forgot to pour a libation before dinner. Offending a god is not a theological abstraction. It is a practical emergency. If your crops fail, if your ship sinks, if your child gets sick, the first question anyone asks is, who did you offend? The second question is, how do we fix it? And the answer is almost always, sacrifice an animal, pour some wine on the ground, and pray that whoever you irritated up there has moved on to being angry at someone else. And yet, for all the danger, the courts, the gossip, the gods, the ostracism, people manage. They navigate, they calculate risk, build alliances, manage their reputations, and find ways to survive in a system that is simultaneously the most free and the most surveilled society on Earth. Demetrios has been doing it for 40 years. He is tired, and he is skilled, and he is not dead yet. And in Athens, that counts as a career achievement. Let's talk about love, or whatever Athens calls the complicated, codified, deeply unequal, and occasionally beautiful thing that passes for emotional connection in the 5th century BCE. Because love in ancient Greece is not what you think it is. It is not what the movies show you. It is not Hallmark cards and sunset walks on the beach. It is something stranger, more constrained, and in its best moments, more deeply felt than you might expect from a civilization that considers women to be, legally speaking, somewhere between a child and a piece of furniture. Marriage is not about love. Let's get that out of the way immediately. Marriage is an economic and social arrangement between two families, brokered by the father of the bride, formalized by the transfer of a dowry, and consummated with a ceremony that the bride has approximately zero input on. Phila was married to Demetrios when she was 14. He was 30, She had met him once before the wedding. This is normal. This is not considered unusual or cruel or even particularly noteworthy. It is simply how things are done, and Phila, like every woman in Athens, was prepared for it from childhood in the same way that you might be prepared for a job, with training, expectations, and the understanding that personal preference is not especially relevant to the arrangement. And yet, and this is the part that complicates the easy narrative of ancient oppression, Phila and Demetrios have, over the course of 15 years, built something that looks, from the inside, remarkably like partnership. They do not express affection publicly. They do not eat together most of the time. They occupy separate parts of the house. But there are small things, the way he brings her a new wool comb from the market without being asked, the way she saves the best figs for his breakfast, the way they argue about the children's education with the passionate specificity of two people who are deeply, unavoidably invested in the same project. It is not romance as you know it. It is something quieter, more practical, and perhaps more durable. And in a world without divorce apps or couples therapy, quiet durability is not nothing. The other kind of love, the one the poets and philosophers write about, is the relationship between an older man, the Erastes, and a younger man, the Eromenos. This is a central feature of Athenian social life, governed by unwritten rules so complex that violating them is a social catastrophe. The relationship is supposed to be educational, mentoring, ennobling. In practice, like all human relationships, it is messy, unequal, and almost always more complicated than the participants want to admit. Friendship, philia, is perhaps the truest form of emotional connection in Athens, and the one that the Greeks themselves value most highly. The bond between male citizens who fight together, debate together, drink together, and stand by each other in court is considered the highest form of human connection, above marriage, above romance, above family. Demetrios and his friend Nicias have been friends for 25 years. They have fought in the same phalanx, voted in the same assembly, and bailed each other out of at least 3 situations that neither of them will discuss in detail. When Demetrios was accused of shortchanging a business partner, Nicias stood in court and spoke for him. When Nicias's son got into trouble, Demetrios lent him money without being asked. This is philia. It is quiet, it is reliable, and it is, in many ways, the glue that holds the entire chaotic structure of Athenian democracy together. In the end, love in Athens is not a single thing. It is a constellation of obligations, pleasures, negotiations, and small kindnesses, shaped by laws that are unfair, customs that are restrictive, and a fundamental human need for connection that no amount of legal inequality can entirely suppress. Phila loves her children. Demetrios loves his friend. Cosmas loves his work. Xanthias loves well. Xanthias keeps that to himself. And Argos, the dog, loves whoever has bread, which, in a way, is the most honest love of all. Let's talk about the gods, not as theology, not as myth, as daily life. Because in Athens, the gods are not a Sunday morning obligation that you can forget about by Monday. They are everywhere all the time, woven into every meal, every market transaction, every sneeze, every dream, every birth, every death, and at least one very questionable medical diagnosis involving a goat and a bronze mirror. You wake up and pour a small offering of wine or oil at the household shrine, a herm, a small stone pillar, or a niche in the wall with a tiny painted figure. Before you do anything else, You say a prayer before eating. You say a prayer before traveling. You say a prayer before the assembly meets. You pour a libation, a splash of wine on the ground, before drinking, which means that every time you have a cup of wine, the floor gets some first, and the floor in most Athenian houses is beaten earth, so it absorbs the wine, and the whole house smells faintly of old wine and damp soil, which is, honestly, not the worst smell available. The gods are not distant. The gods are not abstract. The gods are right here, in the wind, in the water, in the shape of a cloud, in the flight pattern of a bird, in the entrails of a sacrificed sheep. Divination, reading the future from signs, is not superstition in Athens. It is state policy. Before the assembly votes on war, before a general launches an attack, before a ship leaves harbor, the omens are read. A priest slaughters an animal, examines the liver, and pronounces whether the gods favor the action. If the liver looks wrong, too dark, too dry, the wrong shape, the action is delayed, rescheduled, or canceled entirely. Military campaigns have been postponed because a sheep's liver wasn't the right color. The fate of thousands of soldiers has hinged on the internal organs of a barnyard animal, and nobody finds this strange because the alternative, acting without divine approval, is considered genuinely insane. The festivals are where religious life reaches its most spectacular, most expensive, and most socially essential form. Athens has more than 60 religious festivals a year. 60. That is more than one per week, every week, for the entire year. Some are small, a neighborhood sacrifice, a family observance, a prayer at a roadside shrine. Some are enormous. The Parthenon, held every 4 years, involves a massive procession through the city, athletic competitions, musical contests, poetry recitals, and the presentation of a new robe, a peplos, to the statue of Athena in the Parthenon. The Dionysia, the festival of Dionysus, is where the tragedies and comedies are performed, which means that the entire tradition of Western theater exists because the Athenians wanted to throw a really good party for the god of wine. The festivals are expensive, socially obligatory, and genuinely fun. The one time when the rigid class structure of Athens relaxes slightly, when meat is eaten, when wine flows generously, and when the city remembers that it exists for something more than politics and commerce. Demetrios attends every festival he can afford, not because he is especially pious. He is not. But because attendance is noticed, absence is remarked upon, and generosity during festivals is one of the primary ways a citizen builds his reputation. He has sponsored a chorus for the Dionysia twice, which cost him roughly the equivalent of a year's income, and he will do it again, because the alternative is being known as the man who didn't sponsor a chorus, and that is a label that sticks like fish sauce to linen. And yet, underneath the social performance, there is something else, something quieter, something real. When Demetrios stands in the Parthenon and looks up at the enormous chryselephantine statue of Athena, 40 feet tall, golden ivory, gleaming in the dim interior light, he feels something, not belief, exactly, not in the way that a modern person might define it, but a sense of awe, of connection, of being part of something older and larger than himself. The statue is beautiful. The temple is beautiful. The smoke from the altar drifts up through the columns and catches the sunlight. And for a moment, just a moment, the noise of the city falls away. And there is only this, a man standing in a building made by other men, looking at an image of something they all agreed to call divine, and feeling, despite everything, that the world has meaning. In Athens, That moment is everywhere. You just have to stand still long enough to notice it. Let's talk about education. Or, more precisely, let's talk about how Athens produces the kind of citizen who can argue about justice in the morning, fight in a phalanx in the afternoon, and compose a drinking song by evening. Because the Athenian educational system is by any modern standard wildly informal, deeply unequal, and somehow spectacularly effective at producing people who think for a living. If you're a boy, and only if you're a boy, because girls receive no formal education, which is a fact so constant in ancient history that it barely even registers as an injustice to the people living in it. You start school around age 7. School is not a building. School is a man. You're pedagogos, a household slave, usually older, usually literate, usually possessed of the patience of a saint who has made unfortunate life choices, walks you to and from your lessons, supervises your homework, and disciplines you when necessary, which is often because you are 7 and you would rather be throwing rocks at a wall. The lessons come from 3 different teachers, each covering a different domain. The grammatist teaches you to read and write, scratching letters into wax tablets with a stylus, memorizing passages from Homer, and learning to recite poetry with the kind of dramatic flair that the Greeks consider essential to civilized life. The Kitharistes teaches you music, specifically the lyre, which is the instrument of gentlemen, as opposed to the olos, the double reed pipe, which is the instrument of professionals, and is considered slightly vulgar, like playing bass in a wedding band. And the Paidotribes teaches you athletics, running, wrestling, jumping, throwing the discus and javelin, all of it, of course, performed completely naked, because we've covered this, and it's not going to stop being true. The content of the education is almost entirely Homer. The Iliad and the Odyssey are not just stories in Athens. They are the moral curriculum, the cultural encyclopedia, the behavioral manual, and the shared reference library of an entire civilization. Every educated Athenian can recite long passages from Homer by heart. Every argument in the assembly, every defense in court, every after-dinner speech at a symposium will, at some point, reference Homer, because Homer is the one thing that every Greek, Athenian, Spartan, Corinthian, Theban has in common. Homer is the internet of the ancient Greek world, except that everyone has actually read the content instead of just skimming the headline. Demetrios' son, Philippos, is 12, and he is currently making his way through the Iliad with the enthusiasm of a boy who has been promised that Achilles kills a lot of people, and the resignation of a boy who has realized that there are also a lot of speeches about honor that go on for 8 pages. His pedagogos, an elderly Thracian slave named Doros, sits beside him during lessons and occasionally corrects his pronunciation with a gentle tap on the back of the hand, which is the mildest form of pedagogical discipline available, and approximately 600% gentler than what happens in Spartan education, which we'll get to, and which makes Athenian schooling look like a spa day. Higher education, if you can afford it, comes from the sophists, traveling teachers, who charge fees and promise to teach you rhetoric and the art of persuasion. The sophists are controversial, accused of teaching men to make the weaker argument defeat the stronger. Socrates, who charges nothing and teaches by asking questions, hates the sophists. The sophists think Socrates is bad for business. And the average Athenian citizen mostly just wants to know if his kid will be able to give a decent speech at his wedding someday. In the end, Athenian education is not about knowledge. It is about producing a particular kind of person, a man who can think, speak, fight, and participate in the life of the city. The system is exclusive, imperfect, and staggeringly unfair to more than half the population. And yet, the conversations that come out of it, about beauty, about justice, about what makes a life worth living, are conversations we are still having, in the same words, with the same arguments, 2.5 millennia later. Not a bad return on investment for a kid with a wax tablet and an exhausted slave tutor. Let's talk about war. Not the grand, mythological, Helen-launched kind. The ordinary kind. The kind that happens every summer. As predictably as the harvest, as routinely as a festival, and with approximately the same level of neighborhood participation. Because Athens is not just a city of philosophers and potters. It is a city of soldiers, and every adult male citizen is expected to fight. And the fighting is not optional, and it is not distant, and it is not somebody else's problem. The Athenian military is not a professional standing army. It is a citizen militia. When war comes, and war comes often because the Greek city-states fight each other with the regularity and passion of rival football clubs, every eligible citizen reports for duty with his own equipment. The wealthy bring horses, armor, and a servant to carry it all. The middle class, men like Demetrios, bring the hoplite kit, a bronze helmet that turns your head into an oven, a breastplate or a composite corselet of layered linen that is surprisingly effective and only slightly less uncomfortable, bronze greaves for your shins, a large round shield called a hoplon that weighs about 16 pounds, and is by the end of a march the single most hated object in your life, and a long thrusting spear with a short sword as backup. The poor serve as rowers in the Navy, which is, if anything, worse. 12 hours a day pulling an oar on a trireme in the Aegean sun, packed shoulder to shoulder with 170 other men in a wooden ship that smells like sweat, salt, pitch, and despair. The phalanx is where the fighting happens on land. 8 ranks deep, shoulder to shoulder, shield pressed against the back of the man in front of you, spear leveled over his shoulder, moving forward as a single mass. The phalanx is not elegant. It is a wall of bronze and sweat and fear that works, because everyone pushes together and nobody runs. And the moment someone runs, the whole thing can collapse, which is why the greatest shame in Athenian society, worse than cowardice in court, worse than being ostracized, is dropping your shield. Your shield protects the man next to you. Dropping it means you've chosen yourself over your community. It is the one act that Athens does not forgive. Demetrios has fought in the phalanx 3 times. He does not talk about it often. When he does, it is in the way that all veterans talk about combat, with a specificity about certain details and a total silence about others. He remembers the sound, the clash of the 2 phalanxes meeting. The othismos, the push, is a noise unlike anything else. A grinding, crashing, shouting, screaming wall of sound that fills your entire skull and leaves a ringing that lasts for days. He remembers the heat inside his helmet. He remembers the man next to him, Nicias, always Nicias, pressing his shield against Demetrios's back and shouting encouragement that consisted mostly of profanity. He does not remember the faces of the men he fought. He says he doesn't, anyway. The wars themselves are usually short, a few weeks, a few battles, a negotiation that restores the status quo with minor adjustments. But the big one, the one that everyone in Athens knows is coming, the one that hangs over the golden age like a shadow that hasn't quite fallen yet, is the war with Sparta, the Peloponnesian War. It will last 27 years. It will kill Pericles, not in battle, but from the plague that sweeps through the city in 430 BCE. Trapped behind the walls of Athens with a refugee population too dense and too desperate for the infrastructure to support, it will bankrupt the treasury. It will test the democracy to its breaking point, and then past it. And it will end, eventually, with Athens' defeat, its walls torn down, its fleet destroyed, and its empire gone. But right now, in 440 BC, in the evening, in Demetrios's courtyard, the war is still a rumor, a possibility, a topic of debate in the assembly that hasn't yet become a reality. Demetrios sharpens his spear out of habit. Xanthias polishes the shield. Argos the dog sleeps in the doorway. And the city, for one more evening, is at peace, which is the rarest and most temporary condition in the ancient world. Let's step outside Athens for a moment, because Greece is not Athens. And Athens would be very annoyed to hear you say that, but it's true. The world you've been living in is one city-state, one polis, in a landscape dotted with hundreds of them, each with its own government, its own customs, its own army, and its own completely sincere belief that it is the center of the civilized world. Sparta is the one everyone wants to hear about, so let's start there. Sparta is Athens' opposite in almost every way that matters, and the two cities regard each other with a mixture of grudging respect and appalled fascination, like two neighbors who have completely different approaches to lawn care and cannot stop looking over the fence. Where Athens is democratic, Sparta is oligarchic, ruled by two kings, a council of elders, and a set of laws so rigid and so ancient that nobody is entirely sure who wrote them, which the Spartans consider a feature rather than a bug. Where Athens values speech, debate, and individual expression, Sparta values silence, discipline, and collective obedience. An Athenian wins prestige by speaking brilliantly. A Spartan wins prestige by saying as little as possible. The word laconic comes from Laconia, the region of Sparta, and it means using few words, which is the most Spartan thing imaginable. The Spartan education system, the Agora, is where things get genuinely alarming. At age 7, boys are taken from their families and placed in communal barracks where they live, train, and are systematically brutalized for the next 13 years. They are underfed deliberately to teach them to steal food without getting caught. And the punishment for getting caught is not for the stealing, but for being bad at it. They sleep on beds of reeds they've cut themselves. They are trained to endure pain, cold, hunger, and exhaustion without complaint in a system that is, by any humane standard, child abuse organized at a state level and called patriotism. The result is an army of terrifying efficiency. The Spartan hoplite is, man for man, the finest soldier in Greece, and everyone knows it, including the Spartans, who are not modest about this. The Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans held a narrow pass against the entire Persian army, is already legendary, and it will remain legendary for the next 2,500 years, because it is genuinely one of the most extraordinary military stands in human history. And also because the Spartans had an absolutely devastating talent for one-liners under pressure. When told that the Persian arrows would block out the sun, a Spartan reportedly said, "Good, then we'll fight in the shade." This is either the coolest thing anyone has ever said, or the most reckless, and the answer is both. Corinth is wealthy, Thebes is powerful. Syracuse, out in Sicily, is growing fast. The islands of the Aegean each have their own character. Delos is sacred. Samos is ambitious. Lesbos is cultured. And beyond them all, to the north, is Macedon, a semi-barbarous kingdom that the southern Greeks consider barely civilized, and that will, in about a century, produce a man named Alexander who will conquer most of the known world by the time he's 30. But that's later. For now, Macedon is just the place where the wine is rough, the accents are thick, and the kings have an unfortunate habit of being murdered by their relatives. The point is this: Greece is not a country. Greece is an argument. It is hundreds of tiny, proud, fiercely independent communities that share a language, share gods, share Homer, share the Olympics, and cannot stop fighting each other long enough to notice that they are, collectively, building one of the most extraordinary civilizations in human history. And somehow, out of all that chaos, all that rivalry, all that glorious, petty, bloody disagreement, something emerges that none of them planned and all of them contributed to. A way of thinking about the world that will outlast every one of their cities, every one of their wars, every one of their monuments. In the end, the argument is the civilization, and the argument never stops. Let's talk about the theater. Because the theater in Athens is not entertainment. It is not a nice evening out. It is a civic, religious, and philosophical event so important that the city literally pays citizens to attend, and the plays performed there will still be performed, studied, argued about, and wept over 2,500 years from now, which is a shelf life that Netflix would kill for. The Theater of Dionysus sits on the southern slope of the Acropolis, carved into the hillside, open to the sky, and capable of seating roughly 17,000 people, which is more than half the adult male citizen population of Athens at any given time. The seats are stone. The acoustics are, even by modern standards, astonishing. A whisper from the stage can be heard in the back row, which is a feat of engineering that the Greeks achieved without microphones, speakers, or any technology more sophisticated than knowing where to put the curve of a hillside. The performances happen during the festival of Dionysus over several days, and they are a competition. Playwrights submit their work, a panel of judges evaluates it, and a winner is crowned, which means that the Western dramatic tradition begins as a talent show, albeit a very serious one. The tragedies are the soul of the festival. Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides. These are names that Demetrius knows the way you know the names of the biggest directors alive. They write about gods and heroes, about fate and free will, about the terrible things that happen when human pride meets divine indifference. Oedipus discovers he has married his mother. Medea murders her children. Agamemnon comes home from Troy and is killed by his wife. The stories are violent, psychologically sophisticated, and deeply human. The audience sits in the open air, in the sun, and watches masked actors perform horrors that they recognize in their own lives. And then they go home and eat lentil stew and try to sleep, and the stories stay with them, the way all true stories do. The comedies are something else entirely. Aristophanes, the great comic playwright, writes plays that are vulgar, political, brilliant, and absolutely merciless. He mocks politicians by name. He mocks generals. He mocks Socrates, putting him in a play called The Clouds, where Socrates is depicted hanging in a basket above the stage, studying the clouds and spouting nonsense, which Socrates finds less amusing than you might hope. Aristophanes writes jokes about sex, about bodily functions, about corruption, about the war, about the absurdity of democracy itself, and the audience, the same people being mocked, laughs, because Athens, for all its faults, is a city that believes in the right to be publicly ridiculous. You can say anything on the comic stage. Anything. The freedom is extraordinary, and it will not be matched for centuries. Demetrios attends every year. He has seen all the great plays. He has opinions, strong ones, about which playwright is best, and he will share them with you at length if you make the mistake of asking. His favorite is Sophocles, because Sophocles writes about duty, and Demetrios understands duty. Xanthias, who watches from the back of the theater. Slaves are allowed to attend, prefers Euripides, because Euripides writes about the powerless, and Xanthias understands that too. Neither of them will ever discuss this preference with the other, but they both know. And yet, beneath the spectacle, beneath the competition, beneath the masks and the music and the gorgeous rolling verse, the theater does something that no other institution in Athens does quite as well. It makes the audience feel, not think, feel. The tragedies bypass the intellect and go straight to the gut, to the place where grief and fear and pity live. And for a few hours on a spring afternoon, 17,000 men sit together in the open air and feel the same thing at the same time, and that shared feeling is, in some ways, the truest form of democracy Athens ever achieves. Not the vote, not the debate. The moment when everyone in the audience gasps at the same line. That is the city, breathing together. Let's talk about what the Greeks build. Not the ideas, not the institutions, but the actual physical things. The stone and marble and bronze that they shape with a precision so extraordinary that 2,500 years later, we still haven't entirely figured out how they did it. And we have computers and lasers, and they had chisels, and a lot of free time, which tells you something about the relationship between technology and craftsmanship that the modern world has mostly forgotten. The Parthenon is the obvious one. You can see it from almost anywhere in the city, sitting on top of the Acropolis like a crown on a bald head, gleaming white in the sun. Its columns so perfectly proportioned that they create an optical illusion of absolute straightness, even though almost nothing about them is actually straight. The columns lean inward slightly. The platform curves upward in the center. The corner columns are thicker than the others. Every adjustment is deliberate, designed to counteract the natural optical distortions of the human eye, so that the building appears perfect even though it is, technically, slightly wonky. This is engineering in the service of beauty, and people didn't fully understand how it worked until the 19th century. The Parthenon is not a temple in the way you might think of a temple. It is a treasury and a statement. Inside it stands the chryselephantine statue of Athena, made of gold and ivory over a wooden frame, 40 feet tall, holding a 6-foot statue of Nike in one outstretched hand. The gold alone is worth a fortune. Pericles famously designed it to be removable, so that in an emergency, the city could melt down the goddess and use the gold to fund the war effort, which is either pragmatic genius or spectacular blasphemy, depending on your perspective. Cosmas, the potter, works with a different kind of beauty, smaller, more intimate, but no less skilled. His red figure vases are works of art that also happen to be functional objects. The technique involves painting the background black and leaving the figures in the natural red of the clay, then adding detail with fine brushwork. The results are stunning. Scenes of myth, of daily life, of athletic competition rendered with an anatomical accuracy and an emotional expressiveness that would not be matched in Western art for another 2,000 years. Cosmas paints a vase showing Achilles and Ajax playing dice, and the two figures lean toward each other with such casual intensity that you can almost hear the click of the pieces. He paints a woman at her loom, and the figure's posture, slightly stooped, deeply focused, one hand raised to adjust the warp, captures something so specific and so human that it stops you in your tracks. This is what the Greeks do. They look at people, really look at them, and then they make what they see permanent. The sculpture is perhaps the most extraordinary of all. The Greeks carve marble with a skill that makes the stone look soft. They understand the human body, its weight, its tension, its balance, better than any culture before or since, and their statues capture not just appearance but movement. The instant before the discos is released, the moment the athlete shifts his weight, the second the warrior turns to face his enemy. The Rias bronzes, the charioteer of Delphi, the carvings of the Parthenon frieze, these are not representations of the human form. They are arguments about what the human form means, about the relationship between beauty and virtue, between physical excellence and moral worth. The Greeks believe that a beautiful body reflects a beautiful soul, which is wrong in about 7 different ways, but the art it produces is so magnificent that you almost forgive the philosophy, and all of it, the temples, the vases, the statues, the theaters, the public buildings, is built by hand. By slaves, often. By medics, sometimes. By citizens who consider manual labor slightly beneath them, but who are perfectly happy to take credit for the result. The beauty of Athens is real. The cost of that beauty, in labor and inequality, in lives spent serving someone else's vision, is also real. And sitting in the shadow of the Parthenon, watching the late afternoon light turn the marble gold, you can hold both truths at the same time. That's what Athens asks of you. It always has. Let's talk about medicine, and let's use the word loosely, because what the Greeks call medicine is, by modern standards, a fascinating combination of genuine insight, spectacular guesswork, and practices that would get you arrested in any functioning healthcare system. You are about to enter a world where the most advanced physician alive believes that all illness comes from an imbalance of 4 bodily fluids, and where the recommended treatment for a headache might involve bleeding you from the ankle. This is Greek medicine. Buckle up. Or rather, lie down, because they're going to want you horizontal. The man whose name defines this era of medicine is Hippocrates, and to be fair to him, he is genuinely revolutionary. Before Hippocrates, illness in Greece is understood as divine punishment. You're sick because a god is angry, and the cure is a sacrifice, or a visit to a healing temple where you sleep on the floor and wait for the god Asclepius to appear in your dream. Hippocrates changes this. He argues, radically, dangerously, that disease has natural causes, not supernatural ones. This is in principle the foundation of all Western medicine. In practice, it leads to some truly alarming therapeutic decisions. The theory of the 4 humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, is the operating system of Greek medicine. Health is balance. Illness is imbalance. Too much blood, you need bleeding. Too much phlegm, you need warming. Too much black bile, you are melancholic, and the treatment might include special diets, exercise, music, travel, or, in extreme cases, a vigorous purging that involves substances you do not want described in detail while you are trying to fall asleep. The system is elegant, internally consistent, and almost entirely wrong. But it will dominate Western medicine for the next 2,000 years, which is either a testament to its persuasiveness or a commentary on how long it takes humans to admit they've been wrong about something. If you get sick in Athens, your options are limited, but not non-existent. A physician, an iatros, might visit your house, examine you, ask about your diet, your sleep, your bowel movements. The Greeks are very interested in bowel movements, with a level of clinical enthusiasm that borders on the obsessive, and then prescribe a regimen that might include dietary changes, herbal remedies, rest, or surgery. Greek surgery is surprisingly competent. They can set bones, drain abscesses, perform amputations, and even attempt trepanation, which involves drilling a hole in your skull to relieve pressure, and which works more often than you'd expect and is exactly as horrifying as it sounds. They do all of this without anesthesia, without anesthesia, without any understanding of infection, which means that surviving the treatment is, in many cases, a greater achievement than surviving the disease. Phila's youngest child has been sick for 3 days with a fever, and she is terrified. She has given the child boiled barley water with honey, wrapped her in cool linen, and prayed to Asclepius until her knees hurt. Demetrios has sent for a physician, who arrives, examines the child, pronounces the fever a result of excess heat in the blood, and recommends a cool bath and a diet of light broths. The physician is calm. His manner is reassuring. His diagnosis is, by modern standards, essentially meaningless, but his advice, rest, fluids, cooling, is actually sound, and the child recovers within a week. And Phila makes an offering at the temple of Asclepius that costs more than the physician's fee, because when your child gets better, you thank everyone, especially the gods. And yet, and this is the thing that saves Greek medicine from being merely ridiculous, the Hippocratic tradition produces something genuinely invaluable. Observation. The Hippocratic doctors watch their patients. They record symptoms. They note what works and what doesn't. They create case studies, actual, written accounts of individual patients, their symptoms, their treatments, and their outcomes that are, in their methodological rigor, the ancestors of modern clinical records. They are wrong about almost everything, but they are wrong in the right way, systematically, carefully, with an openness to being corrected that the temple healers never had. And in a world where the alternative is sacrificing a rooster and hoping for the best, systematic wrongness is a step in the right direction. Let's talk about what happens when everything goes wrong. Not personally wrong, catastrophically. Historically, civilizationally wrong. Because the golden age of Athens is not a permanent condition. It is a window, and it is already closing. And the thing that closes it is the thing that Athens has feared and prepared for and argued about in the assembly for years. War with Sparta. The Peloponnesian War begins in 431 BCE, and it begins the way most wars begin, with a series of provocations, alliances, ultimatums, and miscalculations that in retrospect look inevitable and at the time looked like things that diplomacy could still fix. Spoiler: diplomacy cannot fix them. Sparta and its allies march into Attica, the territory surrounding Athens, and begin burning crops, cutting down olive trees, and destroying farms, which is the ancient Greek equivalent of economic warfare, because an olive tree takes 20 years to mature, and destroying one is not just an act of war, but an act of generational cruelty. Pericles' strategy is to retreat behind the city walls and let the Spartans burn the countryside, while Athens uses its navy to strike its Spartan allies from the sea. It is, in purely military terms, a sound strategy. In human terms, it is a disaster. The entire rural population of Attica floods into Athens, crowding into every available space. Houses, temples, the spaces between the long walls that connect the city to its port at Piraeus. The city is packed beyond capacity. Sanitation collapses. Water is scarce. And in the summer of 430 BCE, a plague arrives. The plague of Athens is one of the worst epidemics in ancient history, and it arrives at the worst possible moment. The disease, which modern scholars have variously identified as typhoid, smallpox, or measles, kills roughly a quarter of the population over the next 4 years. The symptoms, as described by Thucydides, who caught the disease and survived, are horrifying. Violent fever, inflammation of the eyes, bloody throat, convulsions, and skin ulcers. Those who survive often lose their fingers, their toes, their eyesight, or their memory. Pericles loses both his legitimate sons to the plague before dying of it himself in 429 BCE. The man who built the Parthenon, who guided Athens through its golden age, who embodied the Athenian ideal of the citizen statesman, dies in a crowded, plague-ridden city behind walls that he himself ordered the people to shelter behind. The irony is not lost on anyone, least of all Thucydides, who records it with the careful, devastating precision of a man who understands that history's cruelest lessons are the ones that look like good strategy right up until the moment they aren't. Demetrios survives the plague. Phila survives. Their children survive, all of them, which is statistically remarkable, and which Phila attributes to the offerings she made at the temple and Demetrios attributes to luck. Xanthias survives. Cosmas survives. Argos, the dog, survives. Because dogs do. Because dogs always do. Because the one constant in human history is that the dog makes it through. But the city is changed. The confidence is gone. The sense that Athens is special, protected, favored by the gods. That feeling evaporates in the fever wards, and it does not come back. The war grinds on for 27 years, battle after battle, siege after siege, betrayal after betrayal. The democracy makes decisions that are brilliant and decisions that are catastrophic, sometimes in the same week. The Sicilian expedition, Athens' attempt to conquer Syracuse, ends with the total destruction of the Athenian fleet and the death or enslavement of tens of thousands of soldiers, one of the greatest military disasters in ancient history. In the end, Athens loses. In 404 BCE, starved by a Spartan blockade, the city surrenders. The long walls are torn down to the sound of flute music. The fleet is handed over. The empire is dissolved. And the golden age, that brilliant, chaotic, beautiful, unjust, unrepeatable experiment, is over. But here's the thing. Here's the thing that matters. The walls are rebuilt. The fleet is rebuilt. The democracy is restored. Not immediately, not easily, but it comes back because the idea of it is too powerful to stay buried. Athens will never again be the dominant power of Greece, but the ideas that Athens produced about democracy, about justice, about beauty, about the examined life, those ideas survive the war, survive the defeat, survive the occupation, survive the centuries of conquest and decline that follow. They survive because they are not buildings. They are not walls. They are conversations. And conversations, unlike walls, do not need to be rebuilt. They just need someone willing to keep talking. Let's talk about philosophy, the thing that Athens does better than anywhere else on earth, and the thing that will, more than the Parthenon, more than the fleet, more than the democracy, outlast every physical trace of the civilization that produced it, because philosophy in Athens is not an academic discipline conducted in ivy-covered lecture halls. It is a street activity. It happens in the Agora, at the gymnasium, at dinner parties, in prison cells, under plane trees, and anywhere else where 2 or more people decide to have an argument about something that matters. Socrates is the center of it all. And he is not what you expect. He is not handsome. The ancient sources are very clear about this. He has a flat nose, bulging eyes, and a physique that one student compares with evident affection to a satyr. He is barefoot even in winter. He wears the same threadbare cloak year-round. He does not write anything down. Everything we know about his philosophy comes from the writings of his students, primarily Plato, who may or may not have put his own ideas in Socrates' mouth, which is either devotion or intellectual theft, depending on your perspective. Socrates asks questions. That is his method. He finds someone who claims to know something, a general who claims to know what courage is, a priest who claims to know what piety is, a politician who claims to know what justice is, and he asks them to define it. Then he asks follow-up questions. Then he asks more follow-up questions. And eventually, inevitably, the person realizes that they don't actually know what they think they know. And they are either enlightened or furious. And either way, Socrates has achieved his goal, which is to demonstrate that the only true wisdom is knowing that you know nothing. This makes him very popular with young people who love watching authority figures get intellectually dismantled, and very unpopular with the authority figures being dismantled, which is why, in 399 BCE, a jury of 501 Athenians votes to execute him for impiety and corrupting the youth. The trial is a disaster for everyone involved. Socrates, given the chance to propose an alternative punishment, suggests that the city reward him with free meals for life, which does not go over well. He drinks the hemlock surrounded by his students, and the scene, as Plato describes it, is one of the most quietly devastating passages in all of Western literature. A man dying for the right to ask questions, in a city that was built on the right to speak freely. And the contradiction is so painful that it still hurts. After Socrates, the two giants are Plato and Aristotle. Plato founds the Academy, the first institution of higher learning in the Western world, and develops a philosophy built on the idea that the physical world is a shadow of a deeper reality of perfect forms. The chair you sit on is an imperfect copy of the ideal chair. The justice you experience is a dim reflection of ideal justice. It means that truth is not found by looking at the world, but by thinking about it, and that the philosopher is best equipped to govern. Plato literally writes a book arguing that philosophers should be kings, which is either the most idealistic or the most self-serving political theory ever proposed. Aristotle is Plato's student, and he disagrees with his teacher on almost everything, which is the highest compliment a philosopher can pay. Where Plato looks up toward the ideal, Aristotle looks around at the actual. He classifies animals, analyzes political systems, studies logic, ethics, physics, biology, rhetoric, and poetry, and in each field creates a framework so comprehensive that his works become the foundation of scholarship for the next millennium and a half. He is, arguably, the single most influential thinker in human history, and he is a product of this city, this tradition of argument that starts with Socrates asking a stranger what the word good actually means. And yet, the remarkable thing about Greek philosophy is not the answers, it is the questions. What is justice? What is beauty? What makes a life worth living? What do we owe each other? These are not questions that have been answered. They are questions that have been asked, and re-asked, and argued about, and fought over, and meditated on for 2,500 years, and they are still alive, still urgent, still unanswered. And every time someone sits in a classroom or a coffee shop or a late-night conversation and says, "But what do you really mean by that?" They are doing the same thing that Socrates did in the Agora on a hot afternoon in 430 BCE. They are refusing to accept the easy answer and insisting that the question deserves more. Let's slow down. The evening is getting longer now, and the city has quieted, and the story has traveled a long way from that first morning in the alley with the cockroach on your chest and the rooster in the courtyard. Let's sit for a moment. Let's breathe. You're in Demetrios's courtyard. The sky is that deep, improbable blue that the Aegean does better than anywhere else on Earth. Not quite purple, not quite black, scattered with more stars than you've ever seen. Because there are no street lights, no car headlights, no office buildings glowing in the distance, no ambient hum of electricity. The darkness is total and the stars are absurd. Thick, dense, crowded into the sky like someone spilled a jar of salt across black silk. You can see the Milky Way. You can actually see it, not as a smudge, but as a band, a road, a river of light that the Greeks call the Galaxias Kyklos, the Milky Circle, which is where you get the word galaxy, and which is one of those facts that feels too perfect to be true, but is. Demetrios is sitting on a low stool near the courtyard wall. Near the courtyard wall. Eating olives from a small clay dish and spitting the pits into the darkness with the practiced accuracy of a man who has been doing this for 40 years. Xanthias is nearby, mending a sandal by the light of a single oil lamp, a small clay vessel with a wick floating in olive oil, producing a warm, flickering light that is approximately as bright as a birthday candle and that turns everything into soft shadows and gentle edges. Phila is inside, putting the children to bed, and you can hear her voice through the open window. Low, steady, rhythmic, telling a story about Odysseus that she has told 100 times and that the children will never tire of hearing. Argos is here, of course. He is always here. He has positioned himself exactly equidistant between Demetrios and Xanthias, maximizing his chances of receiving food from either direction, and his eyes, amber, watchful, ancient, move between them with the calculated patience of an animal who has learned that human generosity operates on a schedule, and that the schedule is approximately 30 seconds after the last olive pit is spat. The sound of the city at night is different from the sound of the city by day. The hammering has stopped. The shouting has stopped. The donkeys have gone wherever donkeys go when the sun goes down, which is a question that nobody has ever satisfactorily answered. What remains is smaller, softer, crickets, the creak of a wooden shutter, the murmur of conversation from an open window 2 streets over, the distant, almost inaudible sound of the sea. The harbor at Piraeus is 5 miles away, but on still nights, if the wind is right, you can hear the water, or you can convince yourself you can, which amounts to the same thing. This is the hour when the city becomes human-sized. The public performance is over. The honor, the reputation, the strategic social positioning, all of it recedes into the background, and what's left is just this. A man eating olives, a slave mending a sandal, a woman telling a story, a dog hoping for scraps, and a sky full of stars that have been there longer than any of them, and will be there long after all of them are gone. This is the Greece that doesn't make it into the textbooks. The quiet part, the part between the battles and the speeches and the philosophical dialogues. The part that feels across 2,500 years, exactly like your own life when you stop performing and just exist. Demetrios tosses an olive pit. Argos does not move. The lamp flickers. And the night, warm and close and entirely indifferent to the ambitions of men, settles over Athens like a blanket that smells faintly of time. Let's talk about the end, not the violent end, not the war, which we've already covered, but the slow end, the long dissolve, the way a civilization that burns so bright at its center gradually dims and spreads and transforms into something else entirely, because Greece does not fall the way Rome falls, in a dramatic, dateable collapse. Greece changes, it diffuses, it becomes, in a sense, everywhere. After the Peloponnesian War, Athens recovers, but it never fully regains its power. The 4th century BCE is a century of shifting alliances, exhausted treasuries, and rising powers on the periphery. Thebes has its moment. Briefly, brilliantly, under the general Epaminondas, who defeats Sparta at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE and, for a brief window, makes Thebes the dominant power in Greece. But Thebes's moment is exactly that. A moment. And when Epaminondas dies in battle in 362 BCE, Theban hegemony dies with him. The real change comes from the north. Philip II of Macedon spends 2 decades transforming Macedon from a backwater kingdom into the most formidable military power in the Greek world. He reforms the army, develops the sarissa, a pike nearly 18 feet long, and picks off the Greek city-states one by one. The Athenians discover at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCE that Philip is a genuine threat. Greek independence, in the sense of sovereign city-states, effectively ends on that battlefield. Philip is assassinated in 336 BCE, murdered at his daughter's wedding by a bodyguard with a grudge. His son, Alexander, inherits the throne at age 20. In 13 years, Alexander conquers Egypt, Persia, Afghanistan, and parts of India, spreading Greek language and culture from the Mediterranean to the Himalayas. He founds cities, dozens of them, mostly named Alexandria, because subtlety is not among his virtues. This is the Hellenistic age, the era when Greek culture stops being Greek and becomes global. The philosophy of Athens is studied in Alexandria. The plays of Sophocles are performed in Antioch. The sculptures of Phidias are copied in Bactria. The ideas that began in a dusty marketplace in a small Mediterranean city are now the common language of an empire that stretches 4,000 miles, and the world will never fully unlearn them. Demetrios does not live to see any of this. He dies in his sleep, peacefully, unremarkably, in the house he has lived in for 40 years. Sometime around 400 BCE, Phila survives him. She manages the estate. She arranges the marriages of their children. She lives to see her grandchildren begin their education, and when she dies, she is buried with a simple stone marker that names her as the wife of Demetrios and the mother of his children, and says nothing about the fact that she kept the household running for 30 years, managed a budget more complex than most small businesses, and raised 4 children to adulthood in a world without antibiotics. Xanthias, at some point after Demetrios' death, is freed. Manumission in Athens is not uncommon, and it is possible, though not certain, that Demetrios provides for it in his will. What happens to Xanthias after that? Nobody records, because nobody records what happens to freed slaves, because the record is kept by the people who own them. And once they're free, they disappear from the archive. This is not an accident. It is the structure of the sources, and it tells you everything you need to know about whose stories get preserved and whose don't. And Argos, well, Argos is a dog. Dogs don't get obituaries, but somewhere in the alleys of Athens, there is always another Argos. Rangy, brown, torn-eared, watching the humans with an expression of patient, perpetual hope. The dog survives. The dog always survives. And in a story full of war and plague and political upheaval, there is something deeply irrationally comforting about that. Let's talk about what survives. Not the people, not the buildings, not the dog, the ideas. Because the physical Greece is gone. The Parthenon is a ruin. The Agora is an archaeological site. The olive groves that fed Athens are long since replanted, cut down, replanted again. The harbor at Piraeus is a modern port where container ships dock beside ferry terminals. The theater of Dionysus is empty most days, and the acoustics, still perfect, carry nothing but the voices of tourists and the click of camera shutters. But the ideas are so alive that you encounter them every day without knowing it. When you vote, you are doing something that began in Athens. When you sit on a jury, you are participating in a system that an Athenian would recognize immediately. When you go to the theater, you are doing what 17,000 Athenians did on the southern slope of the Acropolis in 440 BCE. When you argue about justice, you are having a conversation that Socrates started. When you go to the doctor, you are the beneficiary of a tradition that Hippocrates founded, imperfectly, incompletely, but really. When you look at a beautiful building and feel something, not just, that's nice, but something deeper. Something about proportion and light and the relationship between a structure and the sky behind it. You are feeling what a Greek felt looking at the Parthenon, and that feeling has a direct, unbroken line from their eyes to yours. The Greeks did not invent civilization. They did not invent beauty. They did not invent thought. But they did something that no one before them had done in quite the same way. They decided that these things, civilization, beauty, thought, justice, the examined life, were worth talking about, arguing about, writing down, and preserving. They decided that the conversation mattered. And the conversation, once started, has never stopped. Plato's Academy lasted 900 years. Aristotle's works were copied by hand for 15 centuries before the printing press made them permanent. The plays of Sophocles and Euripides have been performed continuously, for 2,500 years. The word democracy is Greek. The word philosophy is Greek. The word theater is Greek. The word theater is Greek. The word music is Greek. The word music is Greek. The language of thought in the Western world is built on a foundation that was laid in a small, noisy, smelly, brilliant city on the edge of the Aegean Sea by people who had no idea that anyone would still be listening. And yet, here you are, listening, in a bed that is softer than anything Demetrios ever slept on, in a room that is cleaner than anything Phila ever managed, in a world that would look to any ancient Athenian like something out of a myth, indoor plumbing, electric light, food from every continent, medicine that actually works, and the ability to hear a story about people who lived 2,500 years ago and feel, somehow, that you know them, that you recognize them, that the distance between their world and yours is smaller than you thought. That recognition is the legacy, not the marble, not the bronze. The recognition that they were like you and you are like them, and the things that matter, love, duty, friendship, beauty, the stubborn insistence on asking why, have not changed. They were always the same. They will always be the same. So here you are, still breathing, still warm, still horizontal. You've walked through the Agora with Demetrios, watched Phila at the fountain house, listened to Xanthias hum a Thracian song in the kitchen, dodged Argos at the doorway, sat through a tragedy that made 17,000 people hold their breath at the same time, eaten lentil stew that was honestly better than you expected, survived a hygiene regimen that was 90% olive oil and 10% wishful thinking, and made it through a golden age, a plague, a war, and the slow, luminous fade of a civilization that refused to stop talking even when everyone else had gone to sleep. You've been to Athens. You've been inside it. Not as a tourist, not as a student, but as a person, standing on packed earth in a wool tunic, squinting in the Mediterranean sun, doing your best, which is all any of them were ever doing. The people who lived this, the real Demetrioses, the real Philas, the real Xanthiases and Cosmises, and every unnamed, unrecorded person who carried water and spun wool, and ate barley bread, and watched the stars from a stone courtyard. They were not heroes. Not most of them. They were not philosophers, or generals, or playwrights. They were people. They woke up, tired. They worried about money. They argued with their neighbors. They loved their children with a fierceness that no amount of historical distance can diminish. They were afraid of getting sick. They were afraid of the gods. They were afraid of shame, which is really just the fear of being seen as less than you want to be. And that fear, that one, has not changed in 2,500 years. Not one bit. And right now, lying in your bed, in your room, in your world, you have things they couldn't have dreamed of. You have clean water that comes from a tap, not a fountain house a quarter-mile away. You have a mattress that doesn't bite, a pillow that isn't wood, sheets that have been washed with soap, which is a product they didn't have and wouldn't have understood. You have antibiotics. You have streetlights. You have the right to vote regardless of your gender, your birthplace, your parentage. You have a door that locks. You have privacy, real privacy, the kind that no ancient Greek ever experienced, the kind where you can close a door and be alone with your thoughts, and nobody is watching, nobody is judging, nobody is keeping score. You have a life that Demetrius would have considered divine, and you're spending it lying in the dark, listening to a story about people who ate lentils and scraped oil off their bodies with a bronze stick. And somehow that feels exactly right. Here's what history teaches, when it's honest. Not a lesson. Not a moral. Just a truth, stated simply and left alone. People endure. That's it. That's the whole thing. They endure plague and war and injustice, and bad food, and worse, medicine, and systems that are stacked against them, and gods that don't answer, and neighbors that gossip, and leaders that fail. And they get up the next morning and they eat their barley bread, and they go to the fountain house, and they argue in the assembly, and they tell their children a story about Odysseus before bed, and they do it again, and again, and again, for as long as they're given, not because they're brave, not because they're special, because that's what people do. They keep going. They always have. They always will. And the fact that you're here, listening to this, warm and safe and breathing, that is the latest chapter of the same story. Not a different story. The same one. So close your eyes. The fan is humming. The room is dark. The blanket is pulled up around you, and it is warm, and it is soft, and it does not contain a single cockroach, which is already an improvement over where we started. The stars are still up there, the same stars that Demetrios watched from his courtyard, the same ones that Phila pointed out to her children, the same ones that have been watching this whole improbable species stumble forward, night after night, for longer than anyone can count. You don't need to remember any of this. You don't need to hold on to the dates or the names or the battles. Let it all go. The Agora, the Parthenon, the hemlock, the phalanx, the lentil stew, the striggle, the dog. Let it soften. Let it blur. Let it become what it was always meant to be. A voice in the dark telling you a story while you drift. The story is old. The voice is warm. And you right now, in this moment, are exactly where you're supposed to be. Sleep well. The Greeks can wait. They've been waiting 2,500 years. They can wait one more night. Good night.